The government is currently working on legislation that would mandate all table saw manufacturers to have some sort of AIM technology. This would not affect any existing table saws, at least at this point in time, the way the legislation is written from what I can read. Any existing table saws or table saws that are currently in the stores, however, they have asked table saw companies to not ramp up their production of table saws and overstock, so that they say that they're just selling off their stock. So does that mean that table saw manufacturers are going to slow down their inventories? I really don't know at this point in time. This is not the first time that this has been attempted. It was attempted in 2003 and it really got nowhere. Since then, other safety features have been mandated and put on these table saws, mostly to do with the riving knife and the guard that attaches to the riving knife, or in some instances in other places on the saw. Those guards are big and bulky and nobody really ever uses them, and unfortunately that's kind of what creates part of this issue. I'm here to tell you more about this legislation right now. Hi everybody, I'm Jim Deerdorf and this is Detroit DIY. Let's dig into this. In October of 2023, the Consumer Product Safety Commission decided it was time to fix these table saws. They are reporting that there are over 50,000 table saw injuries every year. And of those injuries since 2003, they're reporting that there have been 65,000 amputations created by a table saw. It's no real news to anyone that saws are made to cut things. Whatever you put through that blade, it's going to cut. Whether it be your fingers or your hand, it's going to cut it. So they want AIM technology on every single table saw manufactured. What does this mean? This means that if this legislation goes through, that table saws are going to become very pricey. At this point in time, at the low end, the commission has kind of sort of, however they figure it out, decided that it's going to add about $200 to a conventional bench top table saw. Your job site saws, your cabinet saws, and so on and so forth, your production saws, it would be much more expensive than that. And some of your production saws already have some technologies in place that are very expensive and would not come to the consumer market at all. So the big problem that I see with this legislation, myself, my own personal opinion, is that I feel like the government needs to stop protecting us from us. They don't need to protect me from myself. I bought a table saw and I use a table saw knowing the risk. The risk is something that I'm willing to accept. I'm willing to accept the fact that I need to be careful of what I'm doing. I need to know what I'm doing. I need to educate myself on what I'm doing. I need to learn how to use this table saw and use it safely. I need to make sure that this blade has stopped turning before I start putting my fingers anywhere around in this area right here. And I need to be able to identify what boards I'm cutting that can kick back and cause me harm and what can't, and do everything in my ability to stop this table saw from injuring me. And that is exactly what I've done. I have been injured one time by a table saw. I experienced a kickback. When that happened, my finger went into the blade. This finger right here, it cut the end of it fairly severe, 9 stitches, put it back together. Feels a little funny to the touch. I still have everything. And I'm extremely lucky. The accidents with table saws can happen to the most experienced table saw users, and it's just the fact of how these accidents happen. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to go over a lot of safety on these table saws, how to keep yourself safe, and it's going to be geared towards more beginners, and it could even be a refresher for those of you like me who have been using these saws for over 30 years. The AIM technology, AIM is short for Active Injury Mitigation. And what they're saying in this legislation is that if your hand, fingers, or whatever come in contact with this spinning saw blade, that it stops the saw blade in such a fashion that the cut that you get would be no more than 3.5 millimeters, or about 1/8 of an inch. Basically something that you could put a band-aid on. So here's the problem with the current technology. The current technology is obviously used by SawStop, and that technology uses a continuity-based system. This continuity-based system is basically what detects that the saw blade is touching moisture. If the saw blade touches a certain amount of moisture, the puck, I'll put a picture of it up right now, there's an aluminum puck basically down here under the saw. It engages it, jams it into the blade, and stops it pretty much instantly. Of course, when this happens, now you need a new blade, you need a new puck, and you need some other new parts. So it's expensive when it engages. Now, as far as the 3.5 millimeter cut, it depends on, even with the technology that SawStop uses, how this comes about. If someone were to slip, fall, and their hand go on the blade, or lose their footing and their hand go on the blade, it is such a rapid slam down on the blade that the cut is going to be severe. The blade will not stop in time to prevent that. What the blade will stop in time for is if you're using your sled like this and your finger's over too far and it just nicks your finger and you're pushing nice and slow. That's giving that blade plenty of time to stop, and you're just going to basically get a little scrape. But if you're coming at it too fast, or like I say, you surprise that blade with your hand, and guess what? It's going to be way worse than a 3.5 millimeter cut. So the legislation that I've read through is not clear as to how they're going to address that, because the technology that SawStop uses, you know, yes, if you're using everything correct and everything happens the way it's supposed to when your finger goes at the blade, it will stop in time. It may be worse than an 1/8 inch cut. So I don't know. There is one technology that is used, and I'll put a picture of that up. It's a little animated picture of, they use a camera system, and we'll get into this further in a little bit. But this camera system watches your hands. It's focused on the shape of your hands, and it watches your hands. If your hand gets too close to the blade, it will withdraw the blade under the table. This is a very expensive technology, and I guess the nice thing about it is it's not an aluminum puck that slams into your blade. If you watch some videos where the SawStop is actually activated, you kind of see the whole table saw jump in the air when it happens. It is a violent stop to the blade, and you know that could bend your arbor. It could hurt your table saw in more ways with that type of a stop than most people know. Let's go back to the SawStop technology for a minute. Most of that technology is still under patents. The problem with this is they don't know if SawStop is going to allow licensing of their patent for other table saw companies to use. If SawStop doesn't allow licensing to this, there could be a lot of lawsuits like what happened to Bosch. So Bosch developed a system, an aim system of their own for their saw. However, there were parts of it that were similar to the SawStop. SawStop filed a lawsuit, and Bosch can no longer sell that line of table saws in the United States. They are still manufacturing it, and they're selling that saw overseas, but they cannot sell it in the United States. So in some senses, SawStop wants to monopolize the table saw market. And the legislation, the commissioners were talking about this, and they said that what they don't want to have happen is that in this legislation they create a monopoly. but unfortunately it may be what they do. It just depends on how it all plays out. It also may be what stops this from even being widespread, maybe until all the patents expire and every saw company could use this technology without any lawsuits or litigations being filed against them for using the technology in the first place. So currently there are only 3 table saw manufacturers using an AIM technology. One being SawStop, obviously, the other one being Bosch, but they can't sell their saws in the United States because of the litigation with SawStop, and the other one is the Felder Group. The Felder Group is the one using the camera type system. This is a very expensive system. The Felder Group has said that it puts an $8,000 price tag on top of their table saw to put this safety feature in place on their saws. And they have also said they're not interested in moving into the domestic market. So you'll never see one of their saws at Home Depot or Lowe's. It's just not going to happen. And they said even with the best technologies that they thought that the best they could do was reduce that $8,000 by $1,000, making it a $7,000 price tag bump on any table saw that had that system. Now I don't know about you, but I can't afford to go spend 10 grand on a table saw. It just can't happen, and neither would any hobbyist. And the sad truth of that is that, you know, it may force people to seek other alternatives. You know, track saws are looking pretty good, and they've been pushing them hard, and there's some really good ones out there that cut an amazingly straight line. Is it going to do everything that a table saw can do? No, it is not. But it might be some options for some people if this gets passed. Somewhere around 2010, it was mandated that all saws have these blade guards, and they're nice, right? They're good to have. You know what the problem is they're bulky. You can't use, if you want to use a sled like this to do some jointing or cut tapers or something like that, you can't leave this on your saw. It just won't allow you to use a sled. It won't allow you to do some of the stuff that you want to do. It also comes with the anti-kickback pawls that go back here. Now in some cuts you can use this stuff, and it helps to keep you safe. I know you watch YouTube videos all the time and you'll see people using their saw just like this. I'm guilty of it myself. I do it myself. The riving knife is so important, and you'll never see my saw without a riving knife, because that is the main anti-kickback feature. What this is going to do is prevent you from accidentally sticking your fingers in here to pick up an offcut or something like that before the saw stops spinning. That is how 90% of the accidents happen. It's not necessarily that somebody had their fingers over here and the blade cut their fingers off in this manner. A lot of these accidents happen because the guys reach in here to pick something up and the blade is still spinning. They may not have even turned the saw off. And some of that I attribute to wearing headphones, listening to music, daydreaming, going off into your own little space and not focusing on what you're doing. When you're running a table saw, when you're running any saw, you should be putting 100% of your attention to that saw, what's going on, where this blade is in conjunction to your fingers, and keep yourself safe in that manner. So next week I'm going to do a video on kickback, and I've already done one, but I'm going to address it again, and I'm going to describe how kickback got me, how my finger got into this blade when the saw kicked back. That way at least you can watch it. You can have the knowledge to know what can happen when the saw decides to kick back. it's that, you know, I still to this day, I'm not absolutely positive why that piece of wood kicked back out of my saw. My riving knife was here, everything was here. So, you know, it was tension in the wood, obviously, or a knot. Something decided that, you know, something the blade hit in that wood, it didn't like it and wanted to throw it out, and it did. So what they're saying is that if this legislation passes, that they are going to tentatively give saw manufacturers 36 months to implement the AIM technology on any table saw they sell. So you can currently buy a saw stop table saw without any AIM technology on it, or you can buy the table saw with the AIM technology on it. So with this new legislation, if it goes through, you will not be able to sell a table saw in the United States without some type of AIM technology. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against a table saw being safe. I'm just not. I'm not against that at all. I do have mixed feelings about a government entity protecting me from myself, but I want to, you know, kind of note something that I think it may be a benefit of. I think over time the prices of table saws will come back down to, you know, semi-reasonable, $800 or $900. You might be able to pick up a table saw if this goes through. Eventually, I don't think that's going to be right away, but eventually. And the other benefit that I think it may have is that there's a lot of people who are scared to use a table saw because they've heard that it's the most dangerous tool that you can own. And I think with this technology, people may feel more at ease buying and using a table saw. And that could open the door for more people to be hobbyist woodworkers, or, you know, even get into woodworking, period. And I think that is a good thing. You know, I would love to see more people doing woodworking and more people feeling easier about using the saw. But then again, here's the other side of it. You know, what if that one time your finger touches this blade and for whatever reason the technology doesn't work? I mean, will it cause people to be more careless, thinking that the saw is going to take care of them if something happens? Or will people still use these saws with the same amount of caution that they do now? At least some people. I think some of these injuries are occurring to people who have never used a table saw. I'm almost willing to bet that that's the majority. Unfortunately, we don't have those facts, so we don't know how many of these injuries, you know, the 50,000 they're saying a year, are coming to people that have been using the table saw for years versus, you know, people who just bought the table saw and it's the very first time they cut something and, you know, it kicked back, or, you know, somehow it got them. I do know a good friend of mine that's a cabinet builder who had been using commercial cabinet building table saws for many, many years. Was in his shop one evening getting some stuff done. He was cutting a little thin strip of wood off, probably about 1 inch wide. And right as it cut off, somehow the blade grabbed it and launched it at him. He put his hand up to stop that piece of wood, and it hit him in the end of the finger. And it actually, the piece of wood was traveling so fast, it kind of blew up the end of his finger. It wasn't a contact injury with the blade. So when he goes to the hospital and they say how this happened, and he's like, I was using my table saw. Well, obviously it's a table saw injury, but that injury wasn't with contact from the blade. It was from contact from a piece of wood, yes, that the blade threw at him. So, you know, some of that stuff too, I think there's some gray areas there, but I just don't know how they look at it and how they calculate it. But my intentions is to show you over the, like I say, the next several weeks, how to use these table saws safely. I know that there's been some stuff that I've done just last week when I was using the level to show how to joint boards. It was it's cumbersome, it's different. However, I do know where my hands are in conjunction to the blade, and that is the most important thing. I also know that my riving knife is here, and that this is my biggest defense, the way this saw is set up right now, against kickback. So we just got to stay safe. In closing, guys, I really want you to blow up the comments on this video. I want to know what you think about the Consumer Product Safety Commission trying to mandate the AIM technology on every table saw that's sold. I want to know what you think about the price of the saws. You know, could be going up anywhere from $200 to $400 is their estimate. That's just their estimate. They don't know. You know, the table saw companies are going to have to retool everything they do. This saw will not be made with the same dies, molds, and so on and so forth that they're using now. The top may be, but the whole rest of the saw has to be changed. That's all new stuff. That's going to cost these companies a ton of money, and they're going to spread it out over exactly how much time. Also, if this legislation goes through, I wonder how many companies are just going to walk away from the table saw altogether. If they create a monopoly and like SawStop is the only one selling saws in the United States, table saws, for the next, 7 or 8 years, there probably not many people at all would be able to afford one because they're just going to jack the price. So blow the comments up, guys. I want to know what you think about this, how you feel about it, and don't be shy. Get it out there. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider doing so. That's all we got for this time. If you enjoyed yourself, click on the playlist or the video that's going to pop up next to me. The playlist is going to be my table saw tutorials. You can go in there, and this is, like I say, geared mostly for beginners. There's a lot of stuff in there, and some of it I'm going to go back over in the next few weeks. We're going to get some really good in-depth tutorials out there on using table saw for beginners. Remember to always respect the power of your power tools, and we'll see you soon.